And now your private subscription audio bulletin with Daniel-Estulin.
Good morning, thanks for joining us, and welcome to our weekly newsletter in English. When observing from a certain vantage point the information war between the United States and China, what comes to mind is an opera in several acts. The pieces are all there. An opera combines singing and acting, orchestral music, poetry, dance, mime, theatrical scenery, costumes, and lighting. In music, the dynamics of a piece is the variation in loudness between notes or phrases. Dynamics are one of the expressive elements of music. Used effectively, dynamics help musicians sustain interest in a musical performance and communicate a particular emotion to the audience. The final act of our global conflict is the definitive destruction of the global economy. Now, is it just possible that our global metaphorical geopolitical opera, where Biden and Emperor Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Macron, the Queen of England, other politicians, economists, experts, journalists, virologists, criminals, play the role of performers? Still, such an orchestra would need a conductor. And what does a conductor do? Well, the conductor uses his right hand, for example, to hold the baton and set up the tempo, control it thereafter, and deal with other matters of timing. Timing is everything in an orchestra performance as well as in politics. Everything has to be timed to perfection. Nothing, absolutely nothing, can be out of place or left to chance. And who would benefit from such a performance? Let's start with the answer to the second question and apply it to the modern politics. The beneficiaries of the current quarantine capitalism and the disastrous future permanent economy are global tech giants and the United States Federal Reserve. Just before COVID, we were told by the mainstream media that the tech giants in Google and Amazon, Facebook and Microsoft appear to hoard large cash reserves, and soon they will be able to buy whatever they consider strategic to their interest at almost zero cost. Today, the Federal Reserve is buying everything within its reach for next to nothing. We're witnessing a true transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street, no questions asked. Despite the epidemic, Amazon's capitalization has risen sharply, and the corporation, just as COVID hit back in March 2020, hired tens of thousands of desperate people for next to nothing amongst the millions unemployed and the poor. Amazon crushed small and medium-sized American retail companies. As a result, Jeff Bezos' creation remains, the only player in the national market. Other large companies have similar stories. Local losses are offset by the creation of oligopolies in key markets. And the companies that will survive the crisis and the global reset are those forced to pay rent to monopolists simply for the opportunity to exist. But the matter is not limited to buying dirt cheap shares. Today, the contours of a new world are emerging where digitalization, in alliance for the moment with the states, openly rules the masses. Only today, digital corporations that have become states and states that have become digital corporations will be able to respond quickly to the critical or even catastrophic ups and downs of the beautiful digital future, according to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. In other words, the changes that do not obey the usual algorithms. I have another question related to the previous rhetorical question. Can the metaphorical director of our orchestra, in other words, the rebirth of a new digital world coming to life around us, be not a person, but artificial intelligence? Is this possible? Because scientists say that we still face too many obstacles to the creation of the so-called artificial general intelligence. What is artificial general intelligence? Well, it is the hypothetical ability of a non-human intelligent agent to understand or learn any intellectual task that a human being can. In other words, the network operates according to the principle of the swarm intelligence, with the humans controlling the network. For now. These humans think that it is they who make the decisions, they who control the machines. But what if their or our role is negligible and we actually don't know it? Because swarm intelligence, oh boy. We're talking about the collective behavior of a decentralized, self-organized systems, be they natural or artificial. By the way, the expression itself was introduced by Gerardo Beni and Jing Wang back in 1989 in the context of cellular robotic systems. Am I saying man inside the machine or the machine inside a man? Well, first of all, we should understand that today, governments and corporations have at their disposal, highly efficient and highly scalable AI systems that can not only monitor but also control the behavior of individuals, communities, nations, and their leaders. Back in 2013, Edward Snowden revealed a lot not only about the NSA's National Security Agency surveillance methods of billions of people around the world, but also how this information is produced, processed, and used by Big Brother. It is curious that since Snowden's revelations became public knowledge, information about giant centers armed with supercomputers using real digital profiles of hundreds of millions of people acting on government initiatives and creating different social models have stopped. For example, such a system could potentially simulate a martial law declaration in a given country with step-by-step instructions to other systems and bodies of what should be done and when. Since Snowden's revelations, technology has taken a great leap forward, and recent publications make it clear that there are networks of virtual agents, artificial intelligence systems that work in the real world, directing the actions of real agents, communities, and organizations. Homo sapiens is a static and very vulnerable system prone to increasing attacks by increasingly tenacious AI algorithms. AI's objective is to have a more complete image of us, what we do, what we feel, what we believe in, why we act in one way or not another. Algorithms have established almost complete control over the information we consume, and corporations and governments invest tens of billions of dollars in new developments to become leaders in the industry whose core business today is managing human behavior. This behavior is considered today in terms of behaviorism and swarm mentality. How does crowd management work? Well, first of all, through the social networks themselves, but also indirectly through the media, including popular bloggers who play their own important role in the development of swarm thinking. The media and bloggers say, well, they're sensitive to any changes in Facebook and also Google algorithms, trying to adapt to them best they can at all times. That's where the money is for them. Therefore, the algorithm sets the agenda for even the most independent, quote-unquote, public figures, encourages the correct, quote-unquote, content by displaying, removing fake content, punishing the perpetrators of the strike, demonetizing them, or even deplatforming them. The creator of the YouTube algorithm, Christos Gouldrow, explained in an interview with one of the scientific podcasts, recounting how the system analyzes the content of video materials. The algorithm adds views to those that correspond to generally accepted version by the planetary dictatorship and removes or makes it hard to find the content that does not match the globally accepted dialectics, such as my videos and interviews, for example. A Western politician of any level of gravitas, creed, or color who goes against the consensus of the swarm mentality runs the risk of losing the election, losing his position, losing status. When the artificial intelligence giant can remove the sitting president of the United States, there is nothing else that needs to be said. It appears that national politicians are less affected by the swarm and the influence of algorithms. After all, they have their own analytical centers with highly qualified experts who are paid a lot of money to prepare daily press summaries, reports, in-depth analysis of data from intelligence agencies for the politicians in question. But is that really the case? For example, back in 2008, the United States National Intelligence Council warned the President of the United States about the likelihood of a new extremely contagious disease similar to COVID-19 emerging in Asia and causing a global pandemic. The severity of this threat has been repeatedly reported by the directors of national intelligence in their briefings, and in 2017, Dan Coats, the American director of national intelligence in the Trump administration, added that a pandemic would cost the world economy 5% of GDP. In 2019, he repeated the warning, paying particular attention to economic risks. In fact, with today's data in hand, he wasn't far off. Global GDP lost 4.5% as a result of COVID. As Abraham Tucker said, forewarned is forearmed. It's not a fact, because leaders tend to suspect, sometimes not without cause, that the authors of such long-winded reports have their own secret agenda. For example, working for the deep state and making themselves indispensable via organized chaos. And they're not far from the truth, but in any case, the decisions of leaders and the opinions of key advisors they trust can be influenced by psychological manipulation techniques. And for each of them, even with the open data, you can create a digital profile that allows the algorithm to nudge, let's say, so to speak, in the right direction. And let's not forget the revelations of Edward Snowden, who showed the world how the PRISM system of the U.S. National Security Agency works, tracking the behavior of world leaders, including, for example, loyal U.S. allies such as German Chancellor Angela Merkel. However, the behavioral control capabilities inherent in artificial intelligence systems are not limited to the impact of smart grid on world leaders and the creation of swarm thought process or pressure, which builds and builds until the desired result is achieved. The raw data processing method now offers great opportunities for manipulating public opinion or politicians' thought process and decision-making process. The most important thing about them is that the simulation results on the basis of which important decisions are made have become fundamentally unverifiable. U.S. President Ronald Reagan once famously quipped that he only trusts the models. Well, today this assertion is no longer valid. This fundamental shift in focus of what is truth in the era of post-truth and big data can be shown that these concepts are connected. The scientific revolution after Galileo Galilei, which emphasized systematic experimentation as the most valid research method, resulted in developments in mathematics and physics, astronomy, biology, chemistry, and was based on certain laws expressed by clear formulas, ideas, concepts from which theories diverged. These developments transformed the views of society about nature. René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist who invented analytical geometry. Many elements of Descartes' philosophy have, precedents in late Aristotelianism, the revived Stoicism of the 16th century, and earlier philosophers like Augustine. Descartes considered intuition inspired the understanding of the essence of things, the most correct method of cognition, and the main concepts of science as we know it were the ideas of great scientists, Galileo Galilei, Newton, Einstein, Schrödinger, and others. And all of them initially built their theories in their heads, and it often took years, decades, or centuries even to experimentally validate their findings. As the philosopher Karl Popper once has shown, the theory presented by scientists must necessarily predict reality in such a way that it can be verified whether this prediction is true or false. For example, Einstein's theory of relativity, invented on a sheet of paper, received final recognition about 15 years after publication, when Arthur Eddington was able to create the necessary tools and measures, the expected tools and to measure, the expected impact on Mercury's orbit. There is another important aspect of cognition related to the Enlightenment, namely that the value of rational arguments does not depend on who makes them. So, for example, the idea of Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, a Soviet physicist and the father of cosmonautics, they were not rejected just because he was a simple provincial teacher and had no official status in science. His success was proven by experience by the flight of the first man into space. The triumph of the big data, which relies on the ever-increasing power of computers, has returned science to pre-Galilean times. Theories are no longer necessary. Just put the data on the computer, hit the start button, and voila! After 1 hour, we have an effective predictive result. The artificial intelligence of the computer will give us the result, but we will not be able to test these results because an artificial neural network is a black box. Therefore, it remains only to gather as many big data as possible, which will mystically lead to success. By inertia, this approach continues to be called science, but it is radically different from enlightened science. Furthermore, the cognitive scientists and neuroscientists who made big data mainstream science scoff at the right of scientists to present scientific concepts and abhor anything that does not fit within the parameters of their pseudoscientific methods. For example, language as the basis of thought, consciousness, free will. These are the foundations on which science and philosophy have been based since the new time. We observe with amazement that these people call themselves supporters of democracy and progress, and being in the minority, they demand tolerance, but when they come to power, they become, intolerant and pursue everything that goes beyond their perceptions. It's curious that each leader today has his own alchemists and his own magical neural network, since the educational thesis on the verifiability and independent value of any theory has lost its meaning. There are no theories, there is no value, which means that it all depends on how much one or another alchemist knows about how to convince his master that he is the true oracle, and it is precisely his magic that works best. So, on the one hand, at the leaders' table, mystical predictions, and on the other, the pressure of public opinion, which is controlled by social networks. At the same time, the president of the country is subject to manipulation. Now, is it possible to combine all these systems in one, which guides the world leaders and shows the way to the necessary solutions? Well, to answer this question, it's enough to turn to AI algorithms, which today completely control the financial markets. But first, we should find out how successful big data was in fighting coronavirus. Now I have a question. Which AI systems were most involved in fighting the pandemic? Another question. According to what models were the decisions made? If we talk about the United States, we can talk about bioinformatics systems that decipher the genome, determine genetic risks, and predict how effective new drugs will be. It is these systems that have been widely developed in the United States in recent years, including with money from the National Institutes of Health. Artificial intelligence is used to speed up genome sequencing, give faster diagnostics, give us scan analysis. Risk assessment systems based on multidimensional big data were also actively developed over the past several years. Now, we know how China used AI as an effective measure to limit population movement. But not only that. With the help of algorithmic models, the Chinese also predicted the course of the epidemic, developed treatment methods, calculated the logistics of delivery of food and masks and medicine, medical equipment to infectious centers, controlled robots and drones. Another effective use of artificial intelligence. It models the structure of the virus, saving scientists time in experiments that typically take many, many months. Another key question. Are viruses a source of new protein folds for organisms? We see protein folding occurs in a cellular compartment called the endoplasmic reticulum. And this is a vital cellular process because proteins must be correctly folded into specific three-dimensional shapes in order to function correctly. Now, unfolded or misfolded proteins contribute to the pathology of many diseases. It's very important to understand how the protein folds. The number of combinations is almost infinite, and there's reasons to believe that, thanks to artificial intelligence, it is possible today to significantly reduce the time required to develop a prototype vaccine. The coronavirus pandemic has spurred development by both the American and also the Chinese tech giant Baidu, which, despite the deteriorating relationship between the United States and China, is working on this issue in collaboration with the University of Oregon and the University of Rochester in the state of New York. For example, in February 2020, Baidu published its linear folding prediction algorithm to study protein folding. In the wake of the world's attempt to prepare for the corona outbreak, Baidu AI team has released a tool called Linear Fold to reduce 2019 nCoV prediction time from 55 minutes to 27 seconds. According to Analytics India magazine, this efficiency is crucial for understanding the virus and developing its vaccine. The challenge with the existing algorithm for RNA secondary structure prediction is the runtime that scales cubically with the RNA lengths. And this delay in computation has been a huge challenge in predicting structures and applicability on RNA viruses, which has large genomes such as HIV, Ebola, in particular the coronavirus family that ranges from 26 to 32 kilobases, the largest for an RNA virus. So the linear fold is the first RNA folding algorithm to achieve linear runtime. Biomedicine relies on a large number of methods, among which computer science and statistics have long contributed. Given the general enthusiasm for big data, there's reason to believe that traditional mathematical models have been shown to be more effective in predicting the spread of a pandemic than artificial intelligence. But how can this be possible? At first glance, the US government used accurate models based on big data. For example, on March 22, 2020, Donald Trump announced the launch of a new public-private partnership with the goal to unleash the power and resources of America's supercomputers. The consortium included the White House, U.S. Department of Energy, IBM, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. They've also provided U.S. authorities with the enormous computing power of their servers to process epidemiology, bioinformatics, molecular modeling coins. The total computer power provided to the government was reported to have reached 330 petaflops. What's a petaflop? Well, a petaflop is a measure of the power of a computer. And equivalent to 1 quadrillion flops, this is 1,000 trillion flops, where a flop stands for floating point operations per second. Now, shortly before, on March 11, the White House Science and Technology Policy Directorate held a meeting with major big data companies and major research institutions. He was asked the question, how to examine thousands of scientific articles published around the world and dedicated to a pandemic with the help of artificial intelligence to choose the most valuable one there. Since the advent of COVID-19, around 2,000 such scientific papers have already been published. Now, Microsoft's research unit, the National Library of Medicine and the Allen Institute, presented a joint project in which 13,000 of almost 30,000 documents related to the coronavirus were selected. Artificial intelligence sifted the information taken from these papers so that the computers could algorithmize their main findings and data, and most importantly, the information about the authors themselves and their analysis. There are other examples of how artificial intelligence systems work during an epidemic. For example, a Canadian company in Toronto called Blue Dot was able to establish that there was a virus infection in Wuhan by analyzing a wide variety of big data. Using NLP, which stands for Natural Language Processing, they analyzed data from hundreds of sources around the world. Official statements, articles on the internet, flight sales data, weather data, livestock health reports, demographic data, and much, much more. On December 30th, 2019, Blue Dot recorded an outbreak of a typical pneumonia in the Wuhan market area and not only reported it, but also warned the authorities of world cities where flights from Wuhan would arrive in the coming days: Bangkok, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Taipei, Phuket, Seoul, and Singapore. It was these places that became the first centers for the virus to spread outside of China. Another artificial intelligence system for the same purpose was developed by a team of researchers working with Boston Children's Hospital. The Health Map system takes data from Google searches, social networks, blogs, and online forums. It's not about adding random big data to the computer. Both Canadians and Bostonians applied a completely creative approach based on the assumptions that the epidemic would not go unnoticed by the people. Inspired by the success of Blue Dot, the International Center for Artificial Intelligence Research in Slovenia, operating under the auspices of UNESCO, also began to track the passage of the coronavirus through the information field by launching the Corona project titled Virus Media Watch. Another important artificial intelligence tool is the geolocation data of billions of people. Messages from social networks, from audio, from video, text communications, in instant messaging can be linked to the points where people are. Analysis of these messages by artificial intelligence systems to process natural language can give a very accurate picture of what they're saying about the COVID. And not just the coronavirus, but about anything. Johns Hopkins University, which launched a website where you can actually see the spread of the virus in different countries and cities around the world in real time, is the leader in collecting this information. Information about people's temperatures, data from their bodies is also collected, which can also be used in forecasts. Large tech companies have at their disposal a wealth of data on the behavior of Americans. If in the past the scale of this was well hidden, let's say now with the coronavirus outbreak, the representatives of these companies say that this data can be used to fight the pandemic, and even as Google.org inaugural executive director Larry Brilliant stated, change the face of public health. But let's ask ourselves, how effective was big data in the fight against COVID? While in China the use of data by the authorities is fully consistent with the stated objectives, no one concealed that it serves, for example, to control citizens. In the United States and other countries, the stated objectives do not necessarily correspond with reality. Despite the enormous capabilities of supercomputers at the disposal of the United States intelligence agencies, the military, and large corporations, the model adopted is not in fact based at all on big data analysis by artificial intelligence. This is the old SIR model developed by Kermack and McCendrick back in 1927. The Kermack-McCendrick theory is a partial differentiation equation model that structures the infected population in terms of age of infection while using simple compartments for people who are susceptible. Susceptible, I, infected, and R, recovered, removed, thus a SIR model. In other words, what is called the compartmental model that simplifies the mathematical model in epidemiology. Sometimes other models are used, but the experts are not based on machine learning algorithms, but on concepts invented by epidemiologists and mathematicians. Another field where big data and algorithms greatly influence decision-making by politicians is the field of financial markets. Artificial neural network for cyborg financing today not only manage the buying and selling of assets in real time, so there is simply nothing for brokers to do on the exchange. And the most advanced AI system operates in the financial markets, which generate and write press releases and articles on the financial results of companies, distributing them instantly through the network. The interpretation of the news has also passed from people to the machines. Artificial intelligence analyzes the impact on the market of the public statements of news creators, the reaction of the population, and also simulates the potential effect of certain actions, buying, if necessary, digital profiles of those who need to be affected. In the first decade of the 21st century, Facebook, for example, created a social graph that is a global map of users and their relationships. And this is the largest database in the world. Now, can that system, for example, spread memes and affect people's perception of reality, such as, for example, when Facebook clamped down on Trump's labeling COVID-19, the Chinese virus? Obviously, is a rhetorical question. By the way, back in Trump's 2016 National Strategic Plan for the Development of Artificial Intelligence, it was important to both government and industry that artificial intelligence could provide early detection of unusual financial risks. And to this end, the U.S. government launched early warning and data mining models, including models to recognize market manipulation. And from manipulation recognition models, a step or even half a step to the real models of manipulation of the financial markets. Active development in this area has been ongoing for a long time, and scholarly articles are published on simulating financial markets using artificial intelligence agents who learn as they go. As we know, a competitive generative neural network can work wonders, for example, beating the world championship in Chinese checkers, Go. Now, what if such a network plays and controls financial market models? Can such a system or a network of artificial intelligence agents create a global situation where it would have to choose between an economic catastrophe, massive plague, or even a thermonuclear war? Now, the machines can be programmed to analyze the scope of writing of debts and liabilities as the key element of force majeure. You see, there is a $4 quadrillion global debt that can never be repaid. So artificial intelligence would simply calculate the best option based on its own modeling between the death of billions of people to save the global economy as a result of a thermonuclear war versus the long-term survival of the system itself, for example. So I return to the question, can such a system or a network of artificial intelligence agents create a global situation where we have to make a choice between an economic catastrophe and a massive plague? convince the leaders with the help of big data models that there's an algorithm that will allow us to preserve a social system in a single country while regulating the number of victims in another country. Are there behavior models for this reaction? Well, this is actually an open-ended question, but nothing is impossible. I'm obviously talking about control. Finally, if in reality the control may lie in an algorithm that has less intelligence than the intelligence of an earthworm. You see, an algorithm launched by people who have calculated their own profit, which consists, for example, in the total destruction of the economy and its replacement with the economy of numbers. Or, for example, in the creation of a pandemic of fear, in the rise of terror, which will be followed by the appeasement of the principles of digital totalitarianism. There is no doubt that the process can get out of control, as has happened so many times in human history. On that happy note, we end. Thanks for joining us again. Have a wonderful weekend. Until next week, goodbye.
Daniel-Estulin, Copyright Audiences United, LLC, all rights reserved.